Hello and welcome to Inside Neyland Stadium, where Tennessee football just beat Kent State 71-0, shattered a bunch of records along the way. Most points in a quarter with 37, most points in a half with 65, most points in a game in the modern era with 71. Was it most yards in a game as well with, what did they get up to? Over 700. Tennessee just dominates Kent State. I'm Sylvia. This is Noah Taylor. We are with VolReport.com on the Rivals Network. And I don't think we learned too much about Tennessee today in some regard because of how dominant it was. I mean, Nico doesn't even play until halftime. But what's your initial thoughts after such a big win?
Yeah, I think we both went into it expecting Tennessee to roll, pretty easily. Obviously, a struggling Kent State team coming in. Tennessee's defense, of course, it was dominant against NC State, Chattanooga. You kind of expected a little bit of that. To this extent, though, I mean, like you said, they broke just about every record you could. And I'm sure we're very close to a bunch of others. Even the SIDs up in the press box were scrambling at halftime to find out what else, they had broken in the first half alone. But, I mean, again, what can you say about the defense that hasn't been said already? Another game where that's 4 straight now, keeping a team out of the end zone. And Kent State never got close, of course. And then Dylan Sampson, another guy like Nico, one half of work that goes for over 100 yards, 4 touchdowns, which I think tied a modern record in a single game from a running back at Tennessee. So just overall a really, really dominating effort. And again, I think the most impressive thing that you could glean from this, if anything, was the fact that you had so many young guys playing by that second quarter, especially in that second half, and things just kind of seem to keep rolling for Tennessee. And that's a really good sign for this team, with SEC play coming up next week.
That's kind of the theme for the last 2 games is you thought Tennessee was going to win, but like that, I wasn't expecting. Like NC State, most people thought, okay, NC State looked bad against Western Carolina, their opener. Tennessee looked good against Chattanooga. Yeah, Tennessee's going to win, but they didn't necessarily think it would be the margin it was. So yeah, Tennessee, I mean, we put our sport predictions in. I think we all had it 60-something to low digits, but I don't think that we necessarily thought that it would be 65-0 at halftime alone. And obviously Tennessee was way off the gas at the end. Otherwise, that could have got a lot more ugly as well, even with some of those reserves in. Let's talk about Dylan Sampson, though. You brought him up. The more and more that we've seen him this year, now 3 games in, the more and more it feels like he's not going to be on this team next year and he'll be on an NFL roster.
Yeah, I mean, he looks unbelievable. I mean, what he's been able to do. We kind of, you saw glimpses of it the last 2 years when he was behind Jalen Wright, Jabari Small. Obviously, last year, running game was a big part of what Tennessee does, and now you're seeing it again. I think there's really nothing else that can be said about him. I mean, 9 touchdowns now on the season. Speaking of records, I guess he's halfway now to the all-time record, or tying the all-time record in school history. So just a phenomenal game from him. Again, did it in really a short amount of time, which I think was good for him, because we've talked a lot in the last couple of weeks about what the rest of this running back room is going to look like. Obviously, Cam Seldon didn't play again tonight. I don't think that's something super serious, with what Heupel said about holding some guys back. This would kind of be the game to do it with Oklahoma coming up. But, I think that it was really good for him to get a break in that second half. But what he did in that short amount of time, I mean, there's nothing else can be said about it. And like you said, he's really running towards, no pun intended, a draft pick in that NFL draft coming up. So really off to a great start.
Yeah, 13 carries, 101 yards, 4 touchdowns. However, it's behind him that also stood out to me. Deshaun Bishop, in just 7 carries, 120 yards, 2 touchdowns, long of 53, 17.1 yards per rush average. I also thought Peyton Lewis had a really nice game. 10 rushes for 99 yards, almost got towards the end zone a couple times, a long of 35. Cameron Seldon missed the last 2 games. Let's say he's good to go against Oklahoma. Do you ride the hot hand in Deshaun Bishop, though? Obviously, it's going to be Sampson for a majority of the game, and we've seen that against NC State, against Chattanooga. The beginning of these games, it is just Dylan Sampson, and very sparingly they put a guy in. But when you do give Dylan Sampson a couple snaps off, do you ride Deshaun Bishop, who's now had 2 really nice games in a row, or do you kind of turn the keys back to Cam Seldon, who maybe just has 1 game under his belt, and I'm not going to say he had a bad first game, but maybe not to the level we've seen Deshaun Bishop recently?
I think you kind of keep riding with Deshaun Bishop and see where that takes you, see what he does at that stage. I mean, it's kind of, when he came to this program, obviously a walk-on, a local kid, you weren't really sure what the impact he was going to make. But I mean, I know it's Kent State. I know that's a struggling team.
Yeah.
His first 2 carries tonight, he just looked really impressive. I mean, the first touchdown he had, I think, was 56 yards, 53 yards. That cut he makes kind of there at the end with the last guy to beat. Yeah. I mean, he's looked really, really good. And like you said, 2 good games in a row. And NC State, obviously, went into that game as a good defense nationally, and he played well, giving Dylan Sampson some breaks there in the second half. I think you do. I think you ride with him going in that Oklahoma game when you do want to give Dylan Sampson a break, if anything, just to see how he does against a defense like that.
Yeah, we'll talk Nico now, though. Plays 1.5 quarters. Looks good, not great. I would say a couple throws that maybe he'll want back, and that's going to be most football games for most quarterbacks, and you can live with that. Put the ball in harm's way once or twice, but then has a beautiful throw to Chris Brazzell. I mean, just on the money. You could not draw it up any better. Overall, I think you give him a passing grade. I think you're happy with what he did, and it gives you confidence going into Oklahoma. But how would you assess what he did, and kind of where are you at with him as his biggest test to date comes up on the horizon?
Yeah, I think you kind of summed it up well there. Good, not great. You know, a couple throws here and there. Maybe one early that possibly could have been picked, depending on who you're playing in that game. Yeah. Obviously, it helps that it's Kent State. No offense to them, but I think, like you said, that throw to Brazzell really kind of, it just showed you the ceiling that he has, and it's unlimited, really. I mean, that's the kind of thing that just why he's here, what you've seen out of him. We've seen enough of that here in the first 3 weeks that, you know, I don't know how much of it is, you know, the opponent and maybe him just trying to kind of get his feet wet or something. You know, these have been good games for him to do that. Obviously, next week will be a much bigger test for him. But I think you feel pretty good about where he's at right now. Again, you know, the picks last week in Cincinnati State, we've, I think, analyzed those to death. But, again, some things he'd like to have back. And when you see throws like he made to Chris Brazzell tonight, you just see where that potential is at. And certainly something that'll be huge next week in Oklahoma.
I think part of that saying good but not great takes into account the expectations for him.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah.
If you're looking at different quarterbacks throughout Tennessee history and they go out and they did what Nico did today, I think you're maybe saying it's a great performance, but knowing what Nico's capable of, what the expectation is, and everything that goes into that, I think that maybe skews your perspective sometimes. It is sometimes necessary to be like, okay, just because the expectation is that he plays his way into a first-round pick after 3 years, and all of that, that's still a really nice performance from him, I thought, today. And he showed those flashes. He had a throw across the middle of the field where maybe from kind of that TV first, when you look up from like the press box perspective, doesn't look too impressive, but then you get the sky cam come in, the kind of all 22, and it's just a perfectly layered, perfectly placed ball, and that's what he's able to do, and that's what he's shown he can do now in just his 4th start. I think we'll learn a lot about him, though, at Oklahoma. We'll learn what he can do in a hostile environment. That's not something we've seen yet. We saw that 50-50 split over in Charlotte, but that's not going into Oklahoma. Their first ever SEC game. College Game Day's announced that it's going there. Josh Heupel's, that's a whole different beast, and we'll see how he manages that aspect of it. And then also the physical aspect of an SEC game and everything that goes into that. So I think this time next week when we're talking and we're analyzing what Nico did, I think we'll have a much clearer picture on not only what his expectations are, but what the team's expectations are. Because as we stand here right now, it feels like a playoff team, and it feels like a playoff team that could do some serious damage and make a real run at the title.
Yeah, they do, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of, I know 2 of those opponents, Chattanooga and Kent State, but I mean, they're playing at a whole different level. I mean, you look at the defense too. These are games last year where you would have had those moments. You go back to that Austin Peay game, obviously an FCS opponent, maybe even early against UTSA. You have some moments where it's maybe a little bit close early on, and this defense has been dominant. I mean, it's been unreal, and I think that's really the biggest key for this Tennessee team, because then you saw it last week in Cincinnati State. You can have nights, I think, or afford to right now, where Nico is good, not great, you know, maybe missing on some throws. But if you're having, and obviously they're not going to keep everybody out of the end zone. You know, this isn't General Neyland's, 1939 team. But they're just playing so well right now that I think that gives him, takes some pressure off him a little bit, that I think will help a lot. But I mean, I think that's going to be the biggest key, especially next week. Now it'll be a huge test for them as well, to go on the road and and play away from home and try to communicate and things like that. Obviously against a much more talented offense that looked pretty good today against Tulane, I think, and what we were able to see. But yeah, I mean, through 3 weeks, going into this game, Tennessee's firmly in that playoff picture, and next week could go a long way in kind of cementing that.
And the secondary is going to be the one that I think is going to face the biggest test next Saturday. Young hasn't had to go up against much. He had to guard Concepcion against NC State, and they had Noah Rogers and some other guys on that Wolfpack team that posed a problem. But overall, that offense wasn't very high-powered. Yeah. Oklahoma struggled. Well, let's not act like that. Like they had their issues on the offensive end. Their offensive lines beat up and could be taken advantage of by Tennessee's defensive front. But it's probably going to be the best offense they've faced to this point. So how's that secondary going to respond? How's Boo Carter, Christian Harris going to respond at the star position? How's Will Brooks going to do at safety? How are these young cornerbacks, Ricky Gibson and Jermod McCoy, going to handle it? Once again, just like with Nico, I think we'll learn a lot about that group as well. Week from kickoff, Tennessee winning?
Yeah, I said at the beginning of the year that I think that they would win that one. If I'm not mistaken, you guys can go back and look at that and tell me I'm wrong. But I do feel good about Tennessee going into this game for some of the reasons you just mentioned. Obviously, Oklahoma's offensive line being a little bit banged up. There's going to be a lot of emotion in this game, really from both sides. But that might be a little bit added pressure for Oklahoma, welcoming Josh Heupel back, or maybe not so welcoming. But Josh Heupel coming back, first SEC game. I think there's a little bit more pressure on Oklahoma for that reason, but I do like Tennessee. I do like them to go on the road. I think it'll be close. I think, but the thing that's going to be the most interesting to me is how they handle, a true road environment. That's one thing under Josh Heupel. You've had that 1 or 2 games a year on the road that's been just incredibly difficult. They get out of their element. They make, pre-snap penalties, things like that. That'll be a challenge, but you got a veteran offensive line, veteran defensive line. I think they're ready. I think they're ready to go in there. And Nico, obviously a big challenge for him, big challenge for the secondary, like you mentioned. But I think they'll be able to stand up to it.
Going into the year, I didn't feel great about it because of a lot of things you just said. Right now, I do feel pretty good about it. I think Tennessee goes in. I think the defensive front is too much for Oklahoma's offensive line. They don't give too much time for the offense to operate, and at the end of the day, Nico does a good enough job to put that offense in a position to continue to score points. And afterwards, I think the Nico conversation continues to elevate. You keep keeping him in that Heisman conversation, and that defensive front kind of proves why it's considered maybe the best in the entire country. So, winning that game in Norman, I mean, that almost, I don't want to say cements 4 games into the year, but gosh, it puts you in a really good spot to make the playoffs, because you could now afford to lose at Georgia and then maybe when Alabama comes to town. 2 really good teams and 2 games that, we just saw Georgia on the ropes at Kentucky, and Alabama's looked beatable too. So I'm not saying those are 2 losses you have to immediately chalk up, but you can afford to lose 2 games now and still probably feel like you're one of the top 11 teams to get into that field. So it would be a massive win for Tennessee and their playoff hopes in this expanded field. But we'll have you covered all week as we build up to the biggest game day of the 2024 season so far. Like we said, ESPN College Game Day going to be there, and so will we as we make the trip out to Norman. So follow along at VolReport.com as you stay informed. Everything there is Tennessee football and everything Tennessee athletics. Links to everything you need is in the description. Thank you for watching.